Welcome to Onchain Capital, your front row seat to the future of finance. From Web3 innovation and digital asset policy to the power shift between East and West. Today, I am absolutely honored to have my friend Amanda Wick in Hong Kong to talk to us live about some of the work that she's doing from both the public and private sector, as well as some of the latest around world events as it relates to how it impacts the digital asset industry. Amanda, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm incredibly excited to be here and to be on your show.
Thank you. All right, so you are a renowned thought leader in the space. I am sure a lot that are watching already know your background, but for those who may not know, maybe a little bit about kind of your journey, right? From the government sector, Department of Justice, all the way to what you do now, both from the association side and also from the company. So maybe a quick intro, and that would be very helpful.
Yes, my history in 2 minutes or less. It's a somewhat non-traditional path to crypto in that I started as a federal prosecutor at the U.S. Department of Justice, and my focus was on money laundering. And so in 2012, I caught a crypto case and then fell down the rabbit hole from there.
2012?
Yeah, 2012 or 2013. In fact, I remember my agent said, "Do you know what a Bitcoin was?" And I said, "That's not a real thing." And he said, "Oh, it is. And you need to learn about it because I got a guy laundering a bunch of it."
Right.
And so... But there was no training program. So there was just Google and YouTube University, and we were all trying to figure it out. There's like a handful of us in the department that caught these cases, and we had a little working group. And now, of course, all of us are in industry.
That's right.
But it was really interesting. And then over the course of that, I got really into the technology. I went to FinCEN and did a detail in the policy unit there, which is in the U.S. Department of Treasury. I left and went to serve as the chief of legal affairs at Chainalysis, which is a leading blockchain analytics company. I went back to the government to lead the financial investigation for the January 6th committee that investigated the attack on the Capitol. I left after that and founded a nonprofit called the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency.
We'll talk about that in the
Yes. Which I'm super excited to say is starting a chapter in Hong Kong. So if you are located here, please check out womenincrypto.org. We would love to have you. And I did that for 3 years, and then I moved to the board, and now I serve as the head of Americas for a company called Verify Vast, which does a very specific type of compliance software that allows Vast to comply with travel obligations. So we work with Vasts, or virtual asset service providers, or crypto exchanges, and regulators around the world to basically upscale compliance in the travel space.
So really moving from the enforcement side to then advising companies in terms of what to do, and now also building the type of solutions that can actually help them get to that point. So that's really a fascinating journey. So I want to talk a bit about like what you've seen over the last 10 years, right? In terms of the type of things that you were seeing as from the Department of Justice, in terms of what people are doing and whether those type of practices or those type of activities you think are still existing, or there's enough tools and capabilities now that those activities has dramatically reduced. Are you seeing that, or people are always trying to find new ways to get around doing things properly?
Oh, it's just a really good question. I'm going to break it into two parts, only because there's like two aspects of it. I think people didn't realize that criminals are always the first adopters of technology, right? So it was really not surprising that at the beginning of crypto, criminals were the ones who got into it first, the biggest and first, right? I think what was weird is that I think there was this perception that somehow crypto created criminals. Like suddenly the invention of Bitcoin made you want to go scam an old lady to get Bitcoin, which did not happen. But absolutely over time, we saw this when GPR cards were invented. We saw this when Apple Money was invented. Like, if there's a better way for criminals to make, keep, and exchange money, they're going to use it.
They're going to find a way.
They're going to find a way. It's like, I remember somebody saying, like, fraud's like a river. It just flows and finds a way, right? And I think what's frustrating sometimes, and I saw this when I was in the government, and then I saw this later dealing with regulators, is that there's this kind of like naive idea like, well, we need to somehow keep the crime out. And I'm like, you're not going to keep the crime out. Yeah. You need to figure out a way to deal with the crime, because the crime is the certainty.
Yeah.
How you regulate that and how you reduce that or protect people from that is a much more useful conversation than how much crime is there, right? And you see these numbers and people talking about, oh, the amount of illicit finance in crypto. And I'm like, there's no more crime left in Betamax. like, right? There's no more crime. Like there's no more crime left in things that are disappearing technology. Eventually, 100% of crime will be in crypto because 100% of finance will be in crypto. So that the movement of that percentage just enrages me. But going back to something that you asked that I think is like super critical that we don't talk about enough is like the evolution of the maturity of the industry. So I'm going to carve out the criminals because I don't really care about them right now.
And they're always going to be there.
And they're always going to be there. But what was really disconcerting back in like even 2017 was that some of the thought leaders, some of the think tanks, this was long before CCI existed, but like they were advocating for the anonymous free flow of money in a world post 9/11 where that was never going to happen, right? Once we had anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing framework, once you have the FATF, the idea that you're just going to abolish all of that, or the idea that you're going to somehow invent digital finance and it can ignore all the rules.
Wishful thinking.
Why? Like
Probably the very crypto native community.
super,
Yes. Right?
And the thing is over time, that narrative, I would say, hasn't disappeared, but who is still saying it, I think has gotten less. I think one of the things that I was hoping would happen is there are voices in crypto that are building incredible things, right? Like when you look at the creation of oracles, when you look at travel creation, right? Like there are folks who are building things because one of the reasons that a lot of us in government and TradFi came into the space is because we saw this technology and said, oh, we can use this to fix really broken systems, right? Like AML, CFT, and TradFi is just like siloed check. It's very difficult to actually do it.
So long.
It's been around. It's nothing new, right? Like the 1970s Bank Secrecy Act has not been modernized. It was invented for cash. Maybe we change it, right? And we could see all the potential that this technology had to actually do compliance better. And I think what's a little frustrating on two fronts is that because of those initial conversations that the industry was having of like, don't regulate us, and we're not finance, we're something else, we're just tech, even though we move billions of dollars. The industry lost a lot of credibility with regulators, and the time it's taken to build that up has lost regulatory innovation that we might have had if we had been engaging and educating earlier. The industry has gotten much better at that, but now you have regulators who are behind because the tech has been moving so fast that they don't know it enough to regulate fast and quickly. And so they're like struggling to catch up. And in the meantime, people are still building, people are still doing things.
That's right. That's right.
And so it creates this problem. And we were just having this conversation this morning where one of the things that's frustrating is that crypto is so global. And it literally broke the last thing that sovereigns had, right? Money. Like we had WhatsApp, we had data sharing, we had all of that, but we didn't have peer-to-peer money exchange.
That's right.
And the breaking of that is really like breaking like the last sovereign hold. And it is really messing with a lot of countries that are worried about, well, what about my money? What about my currency? What about capital outflows, right? Reasonable things to be concerned about. But then there's the reality of entirely global markets that are moving, exchanging liquidity. And one of my disappointments with the crypto industry, and it's one of the reasons why I went to work at a compliance regtech company, is we don't have to wait for regulators to do the right thing. We've built better compliance. We've built oracles for DeFi. We've built incredible solutions. We could be advocating for best practices, for meeting FATF guidelines, and the regulators could follow us. But instead, you see a lot of companies that are in that TradFi mindset of, well, if I don't have to do it, I just want to make money until somebody tells me I have to do it. And that, I think, is one of the things that I wish the industry would stop doing, is leave the bad parts of TradFi that caused the market crash, that caused the global financial crisis, that literally just makes so much money and only does compliance when there's enforcement actions or somebody goes to jail. What if we could leave that behind and move to a world of crypto where it is digital finance, but it's also best practices because we built best tools?
So I find that fascinating, right? Because if we take a trip back memory lane, when we're going through the .com, and when HTTP and Web 2 or 1.0 first happened, there was already this notion of internet money, right? Remember way back when, there was already this concept that you can break through the borders with messaging, then that means the messaging that carries along with monetary value transfer can happen as well. Now, obviously, at that time, it didn't work. And then, of course, about 10 years ago, maybe even before then, little company called Facebook, right? Tried to do something around that. And that I think was probably a little bit too early, but a lot of that process got written now into various different regulatory regimes, especially for in Europe, the MiCA regime. A lot of it is actually built upon the research that are done around the Facebook DM project. So we're already seeing where that is going, and I agree with you. I mean, you and I both do a lot of kind of policy engagements with regulators. The education and enablement, I feel, around the world, not only in the U.S. but other jurisdictions as well, have really gone up a lot.
Yeah.
Right? So they are now experimenting. They are having very active dialogues, and at the same time, they are now finally realizing that a way to do this isn't just the old way. There are new ways that can be done, and I'm very, very happy to see that. And I'm curious, when you talk about these, in your current role, you must engage with a lot of regulators around the world. Do you have a sense that there's now some common understanding, or it is still leaning more towards, well, how do you put another layer on top of the existing process? Like, how far have we kind of broken through that concept?
I think that's a really good question. And I think part of the problem is that when I talk with regulators, both in my past life and now, there's an interesting dynamic because there has been so much noise kind of coming at them, right? And some of it was at the beginning, don't regulate us. And then all of a sudden it was, oh, we want to be regulated, right? And there was also, maybe this is a fad and it's going away, so maybe we don't need to learn it. And then it was,
all of that.
Yeah. And then it was, oh my gosh, no, this isn't going away. And Genius Act Pact, and suddenly everyone and their brother's like, I need to learn about crypto, right? Which was super frustrating because we were trying to educate for the last 5 years and nobody would believe us. You felt like, the boy who cried wolf, saying you really need to learn about this. I think one of the things that I'm spending a lot of my time on is talking with regulators about what's technologically possible in the space.
Yeah.
Because there were some tools that were built not to the rule, but to what I would call checkbox compliance, right?
Yeah.
And you see some of these companies, some of which I've worked with or worked at, where they built a transaction monitoring tool for Avast with not a single BSA, AML, CFT expert on the team to say, this is what the rule and the regulations are, build the tool to that. And instead it was like, well, this is kind of like the concept. What would the customer want to do? But the problem is the customer isn't necessarily going, they don't know, right? And so they're like, so now one of the things I love about Verify Vast, like shameless plug, and the reason I went to work for them was because they were the only travel rule company that took the FATF guidance and said, well, if this is best practices, build a tool to the rule.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I sometimes find frustrating, like I heard this the other day from a VASP I was talking to, they use this like on this jurisdiction, but not in this jurisdiction. I was like, well, why don't you just use this for both?
Yeah.
And they said, well, because in this jurisdiction,
Right.
we are required by law, but in this one, we don't have to do this, right?
Selective compliance.
And it's so frustrating because I'm like, but if you were just at best practice, you'd never have to worry about what this jurisdiction does. Yeah. And you see this sometimes where, I mean, like, because, Solidus Labs, right? They do market manipulation tooling, right? And they will go and talk with the VASP. It's like, well, but in this jurisdiction, insider trading is legal and market manipulation is legal. So I don't know that we need it. I'm like, but just because they haven't regulated it doesn't mean you want insider trading and market manipulation.
And eventually it's going to happen anyways, right? All the major jurisdictions are going to get to a certain standard.
But here's the thing, even if they don't, is that who crypto wants to be? Is basically what So this is my problem with crypto, is do you want to be the degen cypherpunk anonymous free flow of money, or do you want to grow up and actually take those tools and make the world and finance better? Because we technologically can, but that's a choice that doesn't happen naturally. Like, tech isn't good or bad, but it's not neutral. So you have to have people who are pushing to make the system better. Otherwise, history will repeat itself and we will make the same garbage that TradFi did.
Yeah.
And the thing that I feel bad for regulators is that it is, and I say this as somebody who worked in the government, there are some amazing people who've been in these agencies for over a decade. They are crypto experts. They know everything. They own crypto. They've been in here and they have put forward incredible proposals, and the political will isn't there to make change, either because they don't have to or because they're afraid to, or like there's so many things.
Yes.
But if the industry knows the principles that the regulators want to get to, and they're not really that complicated, let's try to save people and prevent fraud. Let's not let money laundering or terrorist financing happen. Maybe we have safety and soundness. Maybe we make sure that there's reserves on the back end of these things. Maybe we have consumer protection.
And risk-based approaches.
And risk-based different rates. Right. This is all pretty straightforward. We've been doing it. And when you look at things like oracles, right, that were built for DeFi, when people say we can't regulate DeFi, I'm like, and yet we've built a tool that if you put it in, regulators would love it. We could actually make our own standards and say, hey, regulators, we will do this for you.
Yes, yes.
And we don't do that. We wait and we say, oh, well, this regulation is unclear, or in this jurisdiction, I want jurisdictional interoperability. But you could just set a standard like the internet did. Nobody waited around and said, well, France doesn't like ISPs, so maybe we should. It's such a weird thing, but and I think it's personally because of the money aspect.
Exactly. I was going to say, there's the crypto, for better or for worse, one was built on this whole kind of incentive mechanism and fast money, unfortunately, right? So while you can create protocols for the greater good, that protocol needs to generate incentive, otherwise no one is going to go spend the time building it. So that's the kind of the genesis of how this whole industry got started in the first place. But it kind of got moved too far down the line. So then it became very difficult. So the point that you were making earlier, I hear that a lot as well, right? It's the cost of compliance is too high.
Yeah.
So if there are places, to your point earlier, if there are places that we don't have to go all the way up, then we'll just do the bare minimum, and then where we need to go all the way up, then we'll go. I agree with you. It's a balance between how you're able to sustain your business, grow your business, but at the same time to be compliant day one.
This is the interesting thing about fintech. Like crypto, I would say, kind of falls under the giant umbrella of fintech. And what was a little frustrating was you have some of these tech bros who maybe they were at Airbnb or Uber, and they moved over into fintech and then wanted to pretend that the fin wasn't the most highly regulated space in the world. And that move fast break things wouldn't break financial services, right? And if you break financial services, if you allow people's money to get stolen, if you don't have AML, massive, it is so much more different than moving humans in cars or putting them in apartment buildings. And I just don't think they appreciated the ramifications of when you open Pandora's box, how difficult it was to fix that. And so now we're kind of like cleaning up that mess. But unfortunately, some of the biggest entities in crypto are still run by tech pros from those companies. And their mentality has shifted a little, but not enough. And especially in the United States, it's really problematic because when you take that with what happened under the Biden administration, which was wildly unfortunate, where an entire party that theoretically should have been pro-democratization, anti-big banks, and Democrats should have seen all the potential benefits of crypto. But because of Warren and Gensler and Biden and this small portion of the party that went all in against.
But they were, to be fair, there were also very large incidents that have happened during that time.
Oh, true. But no offense, the hypocrisy of looking at failures and we didn't scrap the banking industry when the savings and loan crisis happened, right?
That is true.
Crypto has this there's this, I was just reading an article in Australia about this author who was like, a crypto company donated $50,000 to a politician. I was like, where were you when the mining, banking, why does crypto drive you crazy? But the thing that was existing, legacy industries have crypto.
As an industry, we kind of wear a different hat, and we've been trying to take the hat off ever since, right? And it will take time.
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
We've been taking the hat off from a PR perspective.
That is true.
And we have not really.
In practice, it has.
Yes. In the sense of if you want to be taken seriously, do better. Like actively do better, right? Like don't be a centralized exchange that creates a travelable solution that's garbage that allows you to check the box. Like create a solution that actually helps, right? Or create a standard, right? If you're a Oracle, advocate for DeFi coming on board. And if you're a DeFi protocol that's not using an Oracle that has no AML CFT function, what are you doing? Why are you allowed to exist? Why is good crypto and bad crypto not calling each other out? Now, the answer to this, in my opinion, under the Biden administration was the government was treating them all as bad actors.
Yes.
So the wagons circled.
Yes.
And when the wagons were circled, it was all for one, everyone for all.
Automatically
Everyone's
guilty
under attack.
until you're proven otherwise.
100%.
Yeah.
The day that the Coinbase and Binance complaints came out, because Gary released them on the same day to say this is crypto, there was a moment where Coinbase could have said, no, one of these is an allegation that we're selling unregistered securities, and the other is a transnational money laundering organization. Those are very different things. But when the entire industry is under attack, you unify, you don't delineate.
All under the same category.
100%. And so now, what I think is amazing is that there is this potential, as the wagons have uncircled, that the world is seeing you have two paths. It's basically like the Harry Potter sorting hat. You can be Slytherin crypto or you can be Gryffindor crypto. And what I'm hoping is that Gryffindor crypto will take very proactive steps of, okay, verify that. As an example, we are basically the Swift of crypto. You either get into Swift or you're out. You either pre-verify, follow best practices, or you're not somebody that we should be dealing with. I don't care what the regulation is. You don't have to worry about what Bangladesh's banking laws are, because if a bank there has gotten into Swift, you can transact, you follow those rules. This is where crypto needs to get. Instead of waiting for these regulators to learn about digital assets, we've basically digitized a lot in TradFi. We should set the standards using all these amazing tools that we've built. You can do incredible things in market surveillance and insider trading. Do you really need somebody to tell you that those should be illegal before you advocate for them?
These are common sense, right? Those are common sense. If you go through some of the money service provider, licensing regimes all around the world, they all say the exact same thing, right? These are common sense. So I feel like, I mean, one thing that I do like now, at least where we are now in 2026, is that the industry have matured enough where there's very large institutions that are coming into the space, bringing that maturity, bringing that rigor in having done this before, right? And then you have the early companies from 10 years ago now grown so large that they also realize, and they're also hiring people that come from the TradFi or a regulatory space to really lead them to the next phase. So I do feel like there's a lot more good in that sense in setting standards and becoming best practices together rather than otherwise. I mean, in both of the associations that we're affiliated with, I mean, we do a lot of this work, right? We set up self-regulatory environments, we set up frameworks, we participate in sandboxes. And I feel like there's more will going towards that direction than otherwise. At least I'm seeing it in this part of the world.
Well, and I think that's a key difference,
Okay.
right? In the sense of when I come to Asia or when I go, I would say it's strongest in Asia. There is still this recognition of the need for standards, the idea that there is such a thing as making enough money, or that at a certain point, if you make this much money and sacrifice honor and the norms and the standards, that's a problem. That is not really how the West generally has operated, and it's certainly not where America is now.
Okay.
And so I think there's a problem, especially in democracies where, unfortunately, the horrible trend has been towards pay-to-play politics.
Yes.
And I remember watching this video of this Chinese guy who was saying in China that this is one of the biggest differences between China and America. In America, capital runs the state. And in China, the state would never allow that. State runs the capital. And if you take that and kind of put it in your brain and then like put in the concept of a we society versus a me society, there is just a very fundamental thing that's happening in crypto, which is you have like the exacerbation of all things bad, the speed amplification of all things bad, and the possible amplification of things good, except that you have to drive towards that. And when you look at what's happening in fraud or crimes like pig butchering or impersonation scams, There are things that you have to put into place in order to save the populace from that. And Western cultures are doing an abysmal job at that. And cultures in Asia or like Australia that some people call a nanny state, which I hate that term because everybody hates the nanny until a kid dies.
Right.
And then you realize you needed a nanny because you don't let a 4-year-old decide for themselves whether they swim in a pool. And these cultures are recognizing something fundamental, which is that humanity is facing certain problems, which is crime at metastasization. Law enforcement wasn't doing a good job at financial crime before crypto was invented. Then we took the two things that law enforcement was the worst at, financial investigations and tech, and we combined them. And now it's exploding. And now you have pig butchering, and now you have AI fraud by criminals. You have these things that are literally stripping generational wealth from countries like the US, Australia, and the UK and Canada. And the democracies can't move fast enough to do anything about it. But countries in Asia or like UAE or Singapore, they are able to see what's happening and respond and put in place things to protect their populace. And you might not like the regulations. They're doing their best to try to get it right. But they are the only ones that are in fact balancing the need for progress and innovation and protecting their consumers, while the rest are sitting there trying to figure it out while their populace is at a huge disadvantage.
So you mentioned something earlier, and I think perfectly encapsulate really the difference between the two regions, right? Talk about the we versus the me culture. And in Asia in general, and this isn't just China or others, in general, the Asian culture tends to be you follow the leader. You follow the leader. And hopefully the leader is a good leader, then you follow them to prosperity, right? But you follow the leader. So while there are lots of consultations, I mean, I think a lot of the folks in the West may not realize, and then to be honest, before I moved back to Asia, I didn't realize how much grassroots level debating and consultations are actually done until it gets to a certain point. It almost always seems like, oh, the party says something, or the parliament says something, boom, then you go execute. There's actually a lot of preparation that's already done before it gets to that point, but you only get reported at the very tail end. And so that's one thing. But the other thing is, if you think about Asia, let's put China on the side, because that's obviously a very different environment. You look at Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and Vietnam and Thailand. They are the growing middle power, right? And
The global south.
the global
Even though it's
south,
always-
or I would borrow Canadian Prime Minister's Mark Carney's view of the regulators.
Yes.
So the middle powers realize that you do need to, work together, collaborate, because otherwise you cannot compete. You cannot compete. Now, this isn't just because of what's happening in the tariff war or anything like that. They realize it already, because economically, otherwise you just cannot compete. So there's a lot of willingness to work with each other, to listen. I got it firsthand when I was running a couple of years ago. I was running these Crypto 101 workshops for regulators. I did it at Japan FinTech Week and other places. And you have Japan, Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, they're all sitting in a room. Sometimes they can't talk to each other because of language issues. And they're all sitting there trying to learn how to open a wallet, how to transfer a stable coin from one wallet to another. And I remember once we've got everything all settled, and I told them, like, that's A, the group A, send some money to group B, and they click a button and it's already showing up there. They're like, wait, okay, so that's just a bank transaction or a mobile banking transaction. How different is that? I'm like, actually, that asset is now in the wallet, right? There's no institution behind it. You're there. And I remember like them realizing, oh my God, like this is no longer just policy level collaboration. Like we really need to understand this. And I see it firsthand in Asia. Maybe that's one of the reasons why you might see, a lot of folks keep saying the policy is more progressive in Asia in the digital asset space. I would say that is true. Yep. You think about stablecoin, Japan, Singapore were one of the first ones to have it. The execution, however, hasn't really been there. The execution very often still need to rely on the West, the US, Europe, in actually doing something before the economy.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think they wait to execute?
they wait to execute because in Asia, and again, I am just generalizing here, there's more of a conservatism in doing things rather than wanting to be the first mover. Fast follower is always the number one principle, right?
It's so interesting to me because I have not been able to spend time in China, but I've been to several other Asian countries. And I have one of my best friends is from China. And when we talk about what I think of kind of like a spectrum, and China being on one side and America being on the other side, and Singapore kind of being in the middle, and Hong Kong kind of being like, closer to China. It kind of breaks my heart because there's things that I look at China and I say, if you could take some of the best parts of America and leave the worst, you could adapt and thrive. And I think about America and I think if you could take some of the best parts of China and leave some of the worst parts, you would adapt and thrive, right? And I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little biased. I look at Singapore and I'm like, success, right?
Yeah.
But there is something magical about that place, and they're able to do it because they're small. They're basically, they're sort of a democracy, but like the same party's been in power forever, right? So they can get things done in a way that others can't. But I think what's so frustrating and what's kind of heartbreaking because of what's happening in America, and especially when I look at countries like the UK or Australia in particular, they also have a history of just waiting and waiting and waiting. And then whatever America does, they follow, right? And despite China being a global power, China and all of the Asian countries also tend to have that like fast follower, right?
That's right.
But it doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like when you look at the venture capital community and it's like the big dogs that invest and then all the little pups follow, whether it's a garbage investment or not. Like they just they see a pitch deck and they're kind of like, that seems like a crazy idea. Oh, who got in? Oh, okay, we're going to follow, right? And that like follower mindset is so unhealthy. And I keep praying that in a multipolar world, especially after Prime Minister Carney's speech, right, at the WEF, which I think we're all hoping goes viral amongst the middle power leaders. But I think of what's happening in the world right now like an armada. And these ships have been following the United States based on its representation that it was going towards a certain thing. And then it turned out that thing was a waterfall. And so many countries seem to really be in denial that it is in fact going to go full speed ahead over that waterfall. And my hope is that there are people like Prime Minister Carney who say we have to turn these ships.
Yeah.
And if we all turn in a direction together, the strength of that armada is stronger together, right? Like 30 small scrappy kids on a playground could overtake one fat out of shape bully. But like they're so used to their ways that they don't.
They are, but sometimes it takes a trigger.
I know.
And we now
I kept hoping an alien attack would somehow, but there have not been aliens.
Always been thinking about that, right? Humanity will unite.
If we just had
They are one people.
I know, but you think there's a trigger now.
But that actually, just stay on the alien popper, okay, right? But there's also this tendency to think that all aliens are bad.
Right.
Well, aliens could be like E.T.
Yeah.
They don't.
And we would just kill E.T. We really, humanity would kill E.T.
Let's hope we don't go down that path.
We know what would happen in that movie now, poor guy.
Okay, so maybe a last topic.
Wait, go back, because just real quick, you said there was a trigger. What do you think the trigger is?
The trigger, well, I mean, obviously the trigger is the current administration. Right? Oh, because when you push people too far, then they will start to realize, okay, maybe I should turn the ship around, or at least I need to go in a different direction, right? Do I need to keep following the armada to a place of no return? Like people are not dumb, right? Like most countries.
A lot of people are dumb. A lot of people are dumb.
But countries in general have a certain sense, and the middle powers, and that have been around long enough, they have their place in the world. They will figure things out. We've got to a point where, even last year, I would say, there was still a lot of complacency in just saying, okay, let's see how it works out. But we've come to a point now where in the beginning of 2026, you just realize this is a point of no return. You got to go.
I'm going to make a shameless plug for my book. I wrote a book last year. It was out in May.
Yes.
It's called The Catalyst, The Accelerating Forces Forging the New World Financial Order. And in it, I talk about exactly what you're talking about. But the reality is, one of the catalysts that I talk about is social engineering and just the psychology of humans. And whether you're Asian, American, Chinese, humans at a fundamental level with enough data, we are all very similar and very predictable.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the things that kind of saddens me is that I actually see a lot of people looking at what's happening in the United States and they're thinking, well, we only have 2 more years, right? Because this presidency will end, or in a few months, the midterm
elections going to change.
We see this cognitive dissonance combined with a incurable optimism that things will go back to the way they were, because humans hate change, and they hate change this rapidly at this scale to the world order in a way that they're not prepared for. And let's be honest, a lot of politicians and regulators had it pretty cushy. I mean, when I was in the US government, the default was do nothing. Because if you did something and it went wrong, you were criticized, fired. And if you did something good, there were no parades, there was no reward, there was no bonus.
I use the word funny, not because it is funny, but it's just hilarious that there's that same sense in many governments around the world. Like,
it's human.
We very often say that in Chinese, I'll translate it literally. If you do something, it might go wrong. If you do nothing, it won't go right, right? And sometimes that also applies in policymaking.
It often,
yeah,
it's the default in policymaking. If you look at what happened in the United States, we had statutes on the books going back to the 1970s to fight money laundering and ostensibly terrorist financing. But there was no enforcement functionally until 9/11.
Yes.
It took the greatest terrorist attack in history, a trigger, right? We're not proactive societies generally, we're reactive. Singapore is, I would say, the exception, UAE an exception, where they have the kind of...
but they have different objectives.
They have very different objectives,
They
different
have to
frameworks.
Sort out their future
Yes.
without waiting, because otherwise, well,
Right.
they may not survive, right? That's a very different mentality.
But they also have the funds and the means
Yes.
to chart out, right? And this is where I think some middle powers that don't have those means, if I was in Asia and if I was Thailand or Indonesia or Malaysia, in fact, I saw an Instagram video on this where when America was talking about taking Greenland, somebody made this meme video where it was basically all the countries in Asia like freaking out and saying like, well, do you think you're safe? And then one of them said, oh, well, I have oil and gas. And they were like, oh. And then Vietnam shows up in the sunglasses and is like, we've been here before and we know what to do. And everybody's like, we're on the Vietnam plan, we're on the Vietnam plan. And people forget that. But like, there is very much this... It's so funny because you see this in America where the like Latino cultures will fight amongst themselves until it's a white person. And then they're all united, right? And I think this is the thing that I kind of wish more people would realize. And I say this with such a heavy heart as an American, but one of the things I talk about in my book is, if you have not figured out that it is becoming the West versus the rest, I just need you to wake up and deal with the reality. Because what Trump is being very open and honest about is, if you're a big bully, you can take everything until somebody stands up to you. And we had all this military might, and we were supposed to be the shining city on the hill, and then we elected a bully, and for better or worse, twice, right? And that's our president. And the thing is if you don't fundamentally understand that a bully is going to bully until you pop them in the mouth, or until 30 of you get together. But if you think you're going to stop tariffs, if you think you're going to stop arbitrary and capricious actions towards other countries, if you think you're going to stop America first by wishing that he wakes up and stops being a bully, that I don't understand. And I had heard rumblings that there were countries having like secret trade meetings and that people are trying to insulate themselves. But it's kind of like when we saw people reacting to crypto saying, but we think this is a fad. So we're not going to really do anything. We're just going to like tread water until the Biden administration shuts it down. But you see that same mentality of, well, we're going to have talks and but the midterms will happen. But he can't run again. But there won't be another Trump. But that is not a guarantee. Like, you have to deal with the facts that you have. And the facts that you have is, it is America first and to the harm of others. And if the West is going to like clamp together, I mean, I'd love to think that Canada is not after Prime Minister Carney's siege, but all these other countries really need to start dealing with the new world order as it exists. And if you just keep pretending and slow rolling and fast follower, you're going to fast follow them right over a waterfall.
Well, we will have to see where this new world order is going to go towards. If I'm the betting man, and there are many of us now on poly markets and prediction markets, we will probably get some insights in terms of where the populace thinks where things are going to go. But we'll probably leave that to another future episode.
That's right.
Amanda, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was amazing, as always.
Thank you.
But not only did we cover kind of the fundamentals around the crypto industry compliance and how important it is and also to come up with standards together. So instead of waiting for regulatory clarity, sometimes actually you can get ahead of it, right? But also we talked a lot about, because crypto and digital asset isn't just a thing on the side anymore, right? It's not in a circle.
It is the thing.
It is the thing, right? Tokenization and all of these are going to happen. It is already happening. So if we don't pay attention to what's happening around us, instead of only thinking about token price and this and that, then we're going to miss the boat. So thank you again for coming here.
Thank you again for having me.
And also so happy that you're in Guangzhou. Yeah. All right. All right. We'll see you on the next episode.